podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
This is the FPL Draft Zone, your fantasy team's best signing of the season.
The Premier League has finally kicked off, but who were the big winners of Gameweek 1? We take a look at Gameweek 2 and pinpoint a few players you should be targeting. And we talk waivers with strikers, the order of the day. Hello and welcome to the FPL Draft Zone, a podcast all about draft FPL. I'm Dom Crofts, I hope you are well, and today we're looking back at the opening game week of the new season. We're going to be lauding the winners, we're going to be berating the losers, and we're going to be taking a long, hard look at the best of the rest to see if there's some waiver prospects we need to consider for our draft teams. We're also going to be taking an early look ahead to Game Week 2 with a view to those waivers and free agency, and we might even be crowning someone our hero of the week. But before we get started, I want to take a moment to ask you all to check out FPLDraftNotifications.com. It is a great service where you can sign up your draft league and you will get FPL action sent straight to your phone via Discord, and crucially, those notifications will tell you which manager owns that player in your draft league. So if you're out with the family, you're out on the lash, you're out at a football match, or you're just too busy to keep tabs on all the managers' teams in your draft league, FPL Draft Notifications does the hard work for you. It is a great idea. It's great to have this sort of community creativity in draft, and so it would be brilliant if you could support it. So get involved at FPLDraftNotifications.com. Right, let's remind ourselves of all the results from Game Week 1 with one match left to play as the Premier League returned with a bang, and it all began on Friday night when Manchester United took on Fulham at Old Trafford, and it finished Manchester United 1, Fulham 0. Joshua Zirkzee scoring a late winner from an Alejandro Garnacho assist. Garnacho also missed an amazing chance late on from a Marcus Rashford pass. Mazraoui started at right back and looked particularly good for the hosts. And then on to Saturday in the early kickoff, it was newly promoted Ipswich Town taking on Arne Slot's Liverpool. This one ended 2-0 to Liverpool. Diogo Jota scoring the opener from a Mo Salah assist, and then Salah wrapping up the points himself from a Szoboszlai assist. In the 3 o'clocks, Arsenal eased past Wolves 2-0. Kai Havertz started up front ahead of Gabriel Jesus. He got a goal and an assist. Martinelli got the nod ahead of Leo Trossard on the left wing, and Zinchenko played at left back. Saka was also amongst the goals for Arsenal, but to be fair, Wolves played pretty well in that second half and should not be underestimated. At Goodison Park, it finished Everton 0, Brighton 3, an absolute shellacking for Everton. Mitoma, Welbeck and Adingra got the goals for them. Ashley Young was sent off for Everton. Minte limped off injured with a head injury, but he was on the pitch long enough to pick up an assist for the Seagulls. And Barco did not play for Brighton, with Hinshelwood starting at left back. At St James's Park, it finished Newcastle United 1, Southampton 0. Fabian Schär was sent off very early on in this one after only 28 minutes. That obviously changed the entire complexion of the match. Southampton ended up having 19 shots to Newcastle's 3, 5 on target to Newcastle's 1, and they had 78% possession to Newcastle's 22%. But Newcastle won 1-0. Thanks to a goal from Joe Linton. At the City Ground, it ended Nottingham Forest 1, Bournemouth 1. Chris Wood scoring again. That's 7 goals in his last 11 league games for Forest now. But Antoine Semenyo equalised in the 86th minute for Bournemouth. The Cherries will have a new striker in their squad for their next home game at home to Newcastle. Then, in the late kick-off on Saturday, it was last season's overachievers Aston Villa away at West Ham United, two teams who have been very active in the transfer market. And this one finished West Ham 1, Aston Villa 2. Villa taking a very early lead through a new signing, Amadou Onana. West Ham equalising from the penalty spot via Lucas Paqueta, who converted after Thomas Souček was fouled by Matty Cash. But then the man who West Ham was strongly linked with signing all summer, John Duran, a man who even did the irons sign on social media. So certain was he that he would be joining the Hammers, scored the winner against them. after being set up by Jacob Ramsey. I mean, some things are written in the ruddy stars, aren't they? Then on Sunday, it was a London derby at the G-Tech. It finished Brentford 2, Crystal Palace 1. Ivan Toney not in the Brentford squad for this one. He looks set to leave the Londoners, but no one's entirely sure where he's going, making life very difficult for managers who own him. Brian Mbeumo scored the opener for Brentford in this one from a Visser assist. Eberici Eze had a goal disallowed. Munoz got an assist for Palace's equaliser, but Visser scored the winner for Brentford to give them 3 points on the opening day. And then wrapping up the weekend was the game at Stamford Bridge between Chelsea and Manchester City. Chelsea have been stinky in pre-season. City have been giving homegrown talent a chance. And it finished Chelsea 0, Manchester City 2. Erling Haaland doing what Erling Haaland does and scoring on the opening day again before Mateo Kovacic doubled the lead against his old club. There is still one game left to play, and that takes place on Monday night with Leicester entertaining Spurs. It may well have already happened by the time you listen to this, but if it hasn't, I'm going to confidently predict a Spurs win because Leicester have looked pants in pre-season, they cannot score, and Spurs have a shiny new toy up front by the name of Big Dom Solanke. So those are the results, but who are the players that when it came to the crunch stood up and delivered for our draft teams, and who were the players that were so bad you wish you'd never set eyes on them in the first place, the absolute scuzz buckets? It's time for a little bit of winners and losers.
The FPL Draft Zone. Winners and losers.
First up, let's talk winners. And our first winner from Game Week 1 is Kai Havertz, who scored and assisted in Arsenal's win over Wolves. He was excellent in the second half of last season. He's been switched to a forward this year, having been a midfielder last season. And I am sure a lot of draft managers were a little bit hesitant to draft him as their first choice forward this season, given his overall form since coming to the Premier League and the fact he's going to be competing for minutes with Gabby Jesus. But it turns out there was nothing to worry about because he was absolutely brilliant in this one. He's playing with a lot of confidence. He looks like he's going to be the first choice forward, leading the line for a very good Arsenal team. And crucially, he returned big in Game Week 1. Another winner this week is Nick Pope, who was excellent in Newcastle's win over Southampton. After Shah sending off, he had to be at his best to deny the Saints. He made 3 good saves, he earned 2 bonus points for his endeavours, and he kept a clean sheet. And having missed the majority of last season with injury, we should not forget that in his first season at St James's Park, he kept 14 clean sheets. And he's off the mark this campaign already. So well done to him. And Mo Salah and Bukayo Saka also deserve a mention in the winners category. They both picked up a goal and an assist in their games against Ipswich and Wolves, respectively. As for the losers, the failures, the letdowns, the goddamn deadbeats, Everton defensive assets took one hell of a beating, didn't they? Mikalenko looked out of sorts, Tarkowski looked clumsy, Ashley Young was sent off, and Michael Keane, I have no words. Jake O'Brien and Jared Branthwaite were the only players to come out of their defeat with Brighton with any credit, and that's because they did not play. And both Fabian Schär and Ben Brereton Diaz also enter our losers list. Brereton Diaz for acting like he'd been shot after a gentle clash of heads with Schär, and Schär for being dumb enough to react in the first place. So there you go, a few players you'd welcome into your draft team with open arms, and some players who you hope never darken your draft door again. But I have a question for you, and my question is this. Who was so good they made Lionel Messi look like Eric Jemba Jemba? It's time to reveal this week's Fantasy Hero of the Week.
Hero of the Week.
And this week's Hero of the Week is that guy, Welbs, a man who, like a fine wine, does not seem to age. He got a goal, he got an assist, he got maximum bonus points in Brighton's win over Everton, earning draft owners a whopping, yeah that's right, whopping, 12 points for their sides. And all this from a striker who will have been a third choice pick as a forward option on draft night if he was picked at all. Yes, he'll have competition for a place in that Brighton starting lineup this season. Yes, he may even have to baffle the likes of Evan Ferguson and João Pedro to the death if he wants to keep getting regular minutes. But in his 16th season in the Premier League, Danny Welbeck looks as fit as ever. He's never going to get you 20 goals a season. Let's not even pretend he will. But if you have him in your side at the right time, he is a player that can reward you big time, just as he has in Game Week 1. Get that man a cape, because Danny Welbeck is our hero of the week.
Hero of the Week.
Right, we have one match left in Game Week 1, but we're going to forget all about that for now because we want to turn our attention to Game Week 2, where there are quite a few tough-to-call matches to look forward to. We're going to flag a few prospects on the waivers in a minute, but first, let's take a look at all the fixtures, and there are no Friday night games this week, so all the action gets underway on Saturday lunchtime down at the seaside with Brighton taking on Manchester United. Brighton have only lost one of the last 6 meetings between these two sides. They've won 4 of them. The only game they did lose, though, was at the MX, and it was last season when De Zerbi ball had fallen off a cliff and United won 2-0. Then on Saturday afternoon, there are 5 matches to look forward to. Crystal Palace take on West Ham, which is a game that absolutely loves goals. In the last 2 matches between these two sides at Selhurst Park, there have been, brace yourselves my friends, 14 goals. 14 goals in 2 games. Palace won both of them, by the way, 5-2 and 4-3. And Mateta and Eze got a couple of goals each. So if you own either of Palace's key assets, you may well be onto a good thing. Also, on Saturday afternoon is Fulham against Leicester. Fulham fans will get to see Emile Smith-Rowe in competitive action at home for the first time. They scored 5 goals the last time Leicester came to town, so another game with high scoring potential here. And this weekend really does promise a lot of goals if the past is anything to go by. Manchester City take on Ipswich, which, let's face it, also promises a lot of goals, with the champions taking on a newly promoted side. And this may well be the week to own defensive assets from Manchester City, because they've scored 10 goals in their last 3 Game Week 2 fixtures, and in that time they have not conceded 1. At St Mary's, it's Southampton against Nottingham Forest. Taiwo Awoniyi enjoyed this fixture last time out. He scored 3 goals in 2 games against the Saints last time Southampton were in the top flight. The last time Southampton beat Forest in the Premier League was in 1997, when Matt Le Tissier was still a footballer and not a mad conspiracy theorist. It's Spurs against Everton in North London. Richarlison did the business against his old club last season with 3 goals in 2 games against the Toffees. Spurs have not lost to Everton for 3 seasons now. And then there is a massive game on Saturday night with Aston Villa taking on Arsenal at Villa Park. Villa were Arsenal's bogey team last season. Unai Emery coming back to haunt them. He did the double over the Gunners with Aston Villa. They did not concede a goal, so Mikel Arteta will certainly want revenge this time around. And then on Sunday there are 3 games, so no Friday night football and no Monday night football in Game Week 2. First up, it's the 2 o'clock kickoffs. Bournemouth taking on Newcastle United. Eddie Howe returning to his old club, where his side were well beaten last season. The Cherries have only lost 1 of their last 5 meetings with the Toon, and they scored 4 goals against them last season, although 3 of them were scored by Dominic Solanke. Also at 2 o'clock, it's Wolves against Chelsea. Neto returning to Molineux in his new club colours, and Wolves have a slightly surprising but brilliant record against Chelsea of late. They've lost just 1 of the last 7 meetings, and they've won the last 3 in a row. Who'd have thunk it? Then in the final game of the weekend, it's Liverpool taking on Brentford. Fabio Carvalho making an early return to Anfield. Ivan Toney may well have left the Bees for pastures new. And guess what, folks? This is yet another game that promises goals. There have been 22 goals scored between these two sides in the last 6 matches, which works out at just over 3.5 goals a game. And of those 6 matches, Liverpool have won 4 of them. So attacking assets could be in for a good weekend if history is anything to go by. So those are the fixtures we're all targeting, but who are the players we should be targeting? It's time for Waiver Wants.
The FPL Draft Zone. Waiver Wants.
The early game weeks of the season are great for waivers because we are slowly getting to learn the preferred starting lineups of a lot of teams, and within those teams there will be players who have not been drafted on draft night and who are therefore available to you to strengthen your squad. So we're going to work our way through this week's results, and we're going to highlight a few players from each team who we think are going to be viable draft options ahead of Game Week 2. So let's start with Manchester United and Fulham. United threw Mazraoui straight into their starting lineup on Friday, and to be fair, he was excellent. He ended the game with 3 bonus points, and his manager was full of praise as well. He called him composed on the ball, he called him attacking, and he also said he was only at 70 to 75% fitness. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he's like when he is fully fit. Given he was only added to the game late last week, there is a pretty good chance he may still be available on the waivers in your league. And if he is, I would seriously consider getting him in. United may have only just edged past Fulham 1-0, but defensively, there were signs that they are not going to be quite as leaky as they were last year. They restricted Fulham to 10 chances, only 2 of which were on target, and the XGC for all those chances combined was just 0.48. And even though United were dreadful at the back last year, Erik ten Hag actually has a very good defensive record as a manager. In his last season at Ajax, his side conceded just 19 goals in the Eredivisie, and the 2 seasons before that, they only conceded 23. So he does know how to organise a backline, and now he has his own players at Old Trafford. You would hope they would become much more solid. Maguire looked good on Friday. De Ligt got minutes. Dalot is solid cover at left back while Shaw is injured, and even Martinez can slot in there too. So right now I'm quite bullish about United defensively, and I do think there is a chance they might surprise us this season. And if they do, Mazraoui is probably the pick of those players, although Martinez would be another good option as well. He picked up 1 bonus point in that win over Fulham. United's fixtures are not that easy. They have Brighton away, then Liverpool at home before trips to Southampton and Crystal Palace in their next 4. So 3 away games in 4 and the other game against Liverpool. But long term, I think having a United defender may well be a good idea. Amad Diallo also started on Friday. He played well before being replaced by Garnacho. However, I do think he will end up as backup to the Argentine. So I would not be getting him in just yet. As for Fulham, Smith Rowe got an hour and has been a much talked about player in pre-season, but I would be looking at Anthony Robinson as their best option if he is on your waivers. Fulham have a very nice run coming up. They've got Leicester at home, Ipswich away, West Ham at home and Newcastle at home. So 3 of their next 4 games are at Craven Cottage, and 2 of those games are against newly promoted sides. Robinson got 6 assists last season, and there are worse defences around as well, I would say. So he's definitely one I'd be looking at if he is free in those sort of 8 to 10 team leagues where he may well have been overlooked. Liverpool and Ipswich was a game that didn't really bring us any new waiver options, to be honest. Tsimikas missed out with Robertson fit to start, so that route into their defence is dead in the water. And Harvey Elliott wasn't involved despite an excellent pre-season, having to make do with a place on the bench. Gravenberch might be an untapped route into their midfield, but he's playing so deep, he's not really an option to consider in draft. And as for Ipswich, Leif Davis did nothing to suggest he can repeat last season's Championship form in the top flight, although it is only 1 game and there won't be many tougher ones. And Armando Broja is being heavily linked with a move to Ipswich. He did nothing with Fulham last season, but I think that was based more on financial commitments if he played a certain number of games than a lack of any real quality. So don't rule him out as a third striker option in larger leagues if that move goes ahead. Arsenal's key assets will be taken already, so there's not really any surprise routes into their side. But Rodrigo Gomez looked really good for Wolves on the left-hand side. He gave Ben White a couple of tough moments, and I'd be considering him as a possible 5th midfield option if you feel like you're light in that area. He got 7 goals and 7 assists in Portugal last season, and based on his performance at the Emirates, I think he could be in for a very solid season. And Strand Larsen looked dangerous as well up front, although he's probably already taken due to a dearth of options in those forward positions. Everton's 3-0 defeat to Brighton was not one that they would want to remember, but Barco was a player who a lot of people had high hopes for, and he was only named as a substitute in this one. I actually have him in my main draft league, but I'm not panicking just yet, and I don't think you should either. He missed the friendly with QPR with a muscle injury just before the start of the season, and while he did feature in Brighton's final friendly win over Villarreal, I am going to assume that his absence in this one was precautionary, and I think he will play against Manchester United in game week 2. That's right, I am doubling down. So personally, I'm not going to rush to get rid of him, and I don't think you should either. Give it another week, judge it from there, and see what happens. Brighton did keep a clean sheet at Goodison Park. They looked a little bit vulnerable early on, but then they tightened up as the game progressed. And we've already talked at length on this pod about just how defensively strong Fabian Hertzler's St. Pauli side were last season. In this one, Everton were restricted to an XG of just 0.46. And I do think, like Manchester United, Brighton will surprise a few people with their defensive record this season. They've got United at home next, then it's a trip to Arsenal. But after that, it's Ipswich at home and Nottingham Forest at home. So if you can afford to get in a Brighton defender and bench him for the next couple of games, but then have them ready to go for Ipswich and Forest, that might not be a bad idea. Lewis Dunk would be a good pick, given how Hertzler's St. Pauli side were also excellent at set pieces last year. They scored 15 times from dead ball situations, and Dunk is likely to be the target for a lot of those set pieces this season. Although Van Heck also looks like he's going to be a regular starter if Dunk is already taken. As for Everton, they've got Spurs next away from home, so for me, they are a hard avoid. Newcastle lined up with Lewis Hall at left back and Dan Burn partnering Shah in defence against Southampton. Shah will of course be suspended for the next 3 games, but that means Emil Kraft would be an excellent short-term pickup and a route into that Toon backline. 2 of those matches that Shah will miss are Premier League games, at Bournemouth and at home to Spurs, so not great fixtures, but if you do want that Toon coverage, there is an option there that will be available in 99% of draft leagues. The red card to Shah also saw Jacob Murphy removed after only half an hour, but he remains a decent option on the waivers as a route into that Newcastle attack. As I say, it is Bournemouth and Spurs in their next 2, but Spurs at St James's Park is a pretty good fixture for the Toon. They've beaten them 4-0 and 6-1 in the previous 2 seasons. Ben Brereton Diaz was the man at the centre of the red card controversy from Southampton's perspective, but he did have a solid game after that red card. 2 shots, 1 chance created. He had some lively moments throughout, and I would be thinking about getting him in as a midfielder playing out of position if you're in a larger draft league. And Cameron Archer, who played alongside Brereton Diaz at Sheffield United last season, is also likely to be on your waivers. He's just signed for Southampton from Aston Villa. So if you have a non-playing striker in your squad, he would be a decent pickup. He's likely to play down the middle with Armstrong shifting out to the right-hand side and Brereton Diaz playing on the left. Nottingham Forest and Bournemouth played out that 1-1 draw at the City Ground. Awoniyi was on the bench for Forest, so must be nearing full fitness, and that could mean that some minutes are taken off Chris Wood, although his form has been and continues to be really impressive under Nuno Espirito Santo. New signing Jota was on the bench for the home side, which meant starts on the wing for Hudson-Odoi and Elanga. There's probably a little bit too much competition on those flanks to comfortably back any of those 3 for a regular starting place, but if I had to, I imagine that Jota will probably have to make do with a place on the bench for the first few weeks of the season, so Elanga and Hudson-Odoi are likely to get the majority of minutes over the next few weeks. Forest have also made another signing this week with Ramon Sosa joining from Argentine top-flight club Talleres. I've almost certainly said that wrong. Talleres? Yeah, just roll the R, that makes it sound better. Sure. He got 17 goals and 13 assists in 56 games for Talleres. So if he comes in as a forward, he may well be another one to think about as a third striker option who will surely get minutes for Nottingham Forest. Bournemouth started with Antoine Semenyo up front in this one, but they have now spent a club record £40.2 million on Evan Nielsen from FC Porto as their long-term replacement for Dominic Solanke. So if you have first pick on the waivers this week, getting him in is a no-brainer. And if you have a player like a Gabby Jesus, whose minutes may be in doubt, or even an Ivan Toney, whose entire future may be in doubt, I would absolutely veer towards switching them out for Evan Nielsen. He scored 25 goals last season. He got 4 in 7 Champions League games. The season before that, he only scored 10 times, but that looks like a little bit of a blip because the season before that, he hit 21 goals. He's a Brazilian international, and surely to Betsy, he will be the talisman of the Cherries all season long. West Ham started with Crescencio Somerville on the bench in their defeat against Aston Villa. He looked good when he came on though, but he is going to be a minute's doubt with so much competition for places in West Ham's attack. So if you own him, it may be worth thinking about letting him go. Michail Antonio got the nod up front ahead of Fulkrug, but I do think that will be a short-term move, so I would not rush to move for Antonio. Villa have got a few interesting options. Morgan Rogers was high on a lot of managers' radars before the season began, and he played the full 90 minutes against West Ham, slotting into that number 10 position seamlessly, and he was very, very good. He created 2 chances, he was 100% successful for aerial duels 1 and accurate long balls, and I would expect him to start there for the foreseeable future. He's also likely to be available in a lot of 10-team leagues, so he's another option for you on this week's waivers. Lucas Digne, well, he doesn't look like he's going to give up his place in the first team anytime soon. So while you would imagine that Maatsen will eventually win that battle, I do think for the next few weeks, Digne is going to be first choice left back. He got 74 minutes against West Ham. It's Arsenal next for Villa, which is a tough game, albeit one that they did win twice last season. But after that game, Villa's run is lovely. Leicester away, Everton at home, Wolves at home, and Ipswich away. So some Villa coverage would be very nice indeed if you can get it. And Digne will have been avoided by many draft managers as a result of Maatsen's signing, so he is likely to be available to you. John Duran is another striker option in that third striker slot if you are desperate, although let's be honest, he is surely going to be the perennial backup to Ollie Watkins if he stays at Villa Park. There is one other Aston Villa player, by the way, that we are going to talk about in a little bit, but we'll get to him shortly. Brentford, well, that's an interesting place right now, isn't it? Thomas Frank has been bigging up Ivan Toney for the last week, but then he wasn't even named in the squad for their game with Crystal Palace. There was a lot of talk about a transfer out of the G-Tech. Hopefully his future will be sorted before this week's waiver deadline. Otherwise, managers that own him are going to have a very, very difficult decision to make. He's been strongly linked with a move to the Saudi League and a salary edging towards £20 million for 1 year. But Manchester United and Chelsea are also thought to be sniffing around as well. So it's going to be a case of staying on top of that story this week, seeing what the most likely outcome is going to be and reacting accordingly. And if that move has not been confirmed by the time that you need to make those waivers, you're just going to have to roll the dice and go with your gut. Brentford are being linked with Eddie Nketiah as a possible replacement. He's also being linked with Everton and Nottingham Forest, so maybe he might be worth a gamble on this week's waivers as well, because if he does join one of those clubs, particularly if it's Brentford, he is going to get a lot of minutes. Chelsea have made it clear that Ben Chilwell has no future at the club, so Cucurella's value is going up by the day. He was excellent under Mauricio Pochettino. He was excellent at the Euros as well. So if you do want some Chelsea defensive coverage, he is your best bet. Fofana and Colwill played as centre-backs against Manchester City, ahead of the likes of Badiashile and new signing Adaribayo. Gusto played at right-back because Reece James was both injured and suspended, although he is now back on grass as he works his way back to full fitness. And there was no Raheem Sterling in the squad, prompting a statement from his camp. So if you own Sterling, now might be the time to shift him on. And Manchester City, who lost Oscar Bob to injury in the week, gave a start to Savio. He only played 45 minutes before being replaced by Phil Foden, but I thought he looked pretty good. And while competition for places in those attacking areas does remain strong at City, with Bob out and Alvarez gone, I would now expect Savio to get more minutes than we would all have thought he would prior to the start of the season. And given the uncertainty over his playing time at the start of the season, he is still going to be free in a lot of leagues. And if he does get that serious game time, he is going to be a great route into the front line of the champions. So those are a few waiver options for you this week. And for once, there seems to be a lot of choice in that difficult forward position with the likes of Armando Broja, Eddie Nketiah, Evan Nielsen, Ramon Sousa and Cameron Archer all looking likely to be playing regular first-team football this season for Premier League clubs, and all of whom are likely to be free in the vast majority of draft leagues. Now, earlier, when we were talking Aston Villa assets for the waivers, I did say there was one other player I wanted to come back to, and that's because the player in question is this week's one to watch.
The FPL Draft Zone. One to watch.
And this week's one to watch is Jacob Ramsey, who missed the vast majority of last season through injury, but has had a summer to rebuild his fitness and is now looking to earn himself a starting place in that Aston Villa midfield. He came off the bench and he played around half an hour on Saturday night against West Ham United. He got an assist for John Duran's winner, and Villa fans after the game were absolutely raving about him. At Frankie Maguire said, "Am I dreaming it? Or does Jacob Ramsey look physically stronger? He was excellent. Amazing to see him back. Rodgers and JJ running at defences. Should be a lot of fun." Jake Albo Rice said Jacob Ramsey, back to his best. Short and sweet, but also factual. And Ollie Villa 2 said Jacob Ramsey is so good at getting into that position on the left and making those passes. So there you go. If you wonder what Jacob Ramsey does, now you know. He gets into that position on the left and he does indeed make those passes. We've already talked about Morgan Rodgers as a very solid draft pick, but I actually think Ramsey has got a higher ceiling. He's a more experienced Premier League player than Rodgers. He's performed really well in the past for Unai Emery as well. He got 14 returns in Emery's first season in charge, and I do think it is a matter of time before he cements a place in Villa's starting 11. It's probably going to be a little bit too early to waiver him in this week, particularly given they face Arsenal next, but then they have got 4 very winnable fixtures coming up. And I'm saying it right now, I'm putting it on the record, by the end of those 4 games, I fancy Ramsey to have got at least 1 return and to be on the cusp of being a regular starter again. And that is why Jacob Ramsey is this week's one to watch. Right, that is almost it for today. Game Week 2 starts on Saturday, the 24th of August at 12:30pm GMT. The deadline for your waivers is Friday, the 23rd of August at 11am GMT. We will be back next week, but we are going to be back a little bit later than normal, I'm afraid. The pod will not be released on Sunday night like normal because I am actually heading to Monaco for the UEFA Champions League draw. Ooh, get me. I know. I will try to get something out to you by either Tuesday or Wednesday night, so keep your eyes and your ears peeled for that, but I will not be able to do it on Sunday night. In the meantime, though, please do not forget to subscribe to the pod if you haven't already. We're on pretty much every pod platform on the planet now, and we're also on YouTube as well, albeit in audio form only. I'm not quite ready to show my face to the public just yet. You can also follow us on social media though. X is the best one to reach us on. We're also on Instagram. Our handle on both is at FPL Draft Zone. Come and say hello. We would love to hear from you. But that is it for this week. I hope the draft gods have smiled on you in this opening weekend of the Premier League season. And here is to Game Week 2 and beyond. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.